how did you get into journalism in the first place, and why did you want to get into journalism?
Well, I never thought I would get into journalism. While still at high school, I'd applied for just about every cadetship or journalism role I could anywhere, whether that was the Bugle at Brewarrina or anywhere, just to get a foot in the door. I did manage to get a foot in the door with the Sydney Morning Herald, where I sat a couple of their exams and did pretty well, and of course thought I'd be a shoo-in for it, and of course missed out. This was in late 1979, and I was thinking, better start thinking about fallback careers, and I started looking around, and ironically BHP wanted to give me a traineeship as a geologist. Ironic, because geology was the worst subject I had in my HSC, which is my advice is don't worry too much about the HSC. No one ever really wants to know about it unless you want to get the top marks to get into uni. So I got that lined up and I was ready to go to uni, which my parents were very excited about. And one day my father, who was a shift worker for Australia Post, was at home and got a phone call from the cadet counsellor at News Limited, the Daily Mirror specifically, saying that Peter's applied for a job here. We'd like him to come in because we think that he's got what it takes to become a copy boy and maybe a cadet. And I was right in on that one, and I had my first day and I walked into the doors at Holt Street, big orange walls, and I remember looking at all the typewriters clashing and people yelling and smoking, probably Camels, probably my early introduction to passive smoking, and thought, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here, but I think I'm going to like it. And it was great because it got me in and toughened me up, because I was straight out of Catholic school where I don't think anyone had ever yelled at me, very often anyway. I got in and I learned journalism as a trade from the ground up rather than being taken away to learn the theory. And that's something that I feel very grateful for, that I was much better off in the long run with my News Limited training, particularly the Daily Mirror, to be able to do that, where I early on became one of their better known foot in the door guys and be sent off as a cadet to do senior work, but I was able to work alongside some of the great sports writers and crime writers. So I feel fortunate that I was able to get that entry into journalism, which would be impossible now.
What made you so determined to get into the media?
Well, like most early teenagers, you tend to have no idea. I'd sort of thought, oh, I'll be like these other guys I'm going to school with, and I'll end up being a lawyer or a chartered accountant or an engineer or something, but I never really felt I was in that mode or in that mould. I probably should have been encouraged to be a gardener and ride a mower, but I had a couple of career counsellors suggesting that the corporate area might be my way, but I don't think they really had much of an idea. And I was talking to my mum in the kitchen one evening when she was listening to the PM program, and she said, oh, Peter, I always thought it would be great to be a journalist. Wouldn't that be exciting to do that, to have that opportunity? And from then I thought, yes, that's what I need to focus on. My mother has since denied encouraging me in that direction, but I'm sure that she said that, and other people did, and other people encouraged me in that direction. I think mainly because, not because I could write or anything like that, just because I had some get up and go and knew how to chase, and I was pretty tenacious on a lot of things, and I never let anything go, which came in very handy in a journalism career where knockbacks can really give you a big setback sometimes and you don't feel like going, but you keep persistent, build the relationship, and one day you get that.
And you've been persistent for nearly 5 decades
Yeah.
in journalism.
Yeah.
What have been some of the highlights in that career?
Well, I'd have to say, apart from the day that I got the phone call in 1990 from my boss at the time, Peter Monkton, saying that I was going to Washington, I just was almost jumping out of my skin. I couldn't believe it, because I was up against these ABC veterans like Greg Wilesmith and Sally Neighbour and Frank Maguire, Greg Turnbull, other people. And I thought, I'm just in here as part of the lineup. And I felt that I needed to display something different in that interview that I've passed on to other people, and that was to question the panel. And right at the end of this interrogation, which seemed to be the standard questions, they say, "Do you have any questions, Peter?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to get some feedback on what you thought about my show reel," which I'd put about 10 stories on to show how great I was. And none of them had watched. And I said, "Well, look, I'd like to think that you don't make a decision in this important role, which is important to my career, until you've watched this show reel." And from then I got the job. And I passed that on. I thought, you've always got to have something in your back pocket to be able to show you've got that point of difference that's just a bit more than the next guy, to show that you can do the job. And I was hungry. I knew that if I screwed it up, I wouldn't last a year. But I knew that if I was successful, it'd be the start of a whole new part of my career.
And you were Washington Bureau Chief
Yeah.
for the ABC,
Yeah.
and I know, talking to you, that was a real highlight of
Yeah.
your career, your time in the US.
That was a highlight, being in the US. I originally went over as a correspondent. Later, when the bureau chief at the time moved on, my other best boss ever, Ian McIntosh, made me bureau chief, and that gave me some early management experience dealing with tricky issues, most of them not editorial, most of them staff related, which helped me sort out a few things for later when I went back home to Melbourne, where I was the head of TV news and current affairs in Melbourne.
And while you were in the US, you met the one and only Bill Clinton.
Yeah, that was a highlight. I'd gone up to the New Hampshire primaries with Heather Hewitt, who I think is one of the great people I've worked with. And the way we would operate would be that we're ABC Australia. Get things in context. You are the smallest fish in the biggest media pond in the world. So each day we were up there, I thought, I will choose to go to the lowest profile location or event, because we were getting feeds in from NBC and ABC, so I knew everything was covered from the network experience. But if I could go and get something special, that'd be added value. So I'm in this nursing home in Nashua, New Hampshire, I think, standing up the back of the room. It was just after the book on Clinton, Primary Colours, had come out, based on this exuberant governor of Arkansas. I'm up the back of the room. He's giving his story about how his grandpappy fought in World War II and paid taxes all his life and couldn't afford medicines, and everyone was tearing up in the audience, including Clinton, who was an expert. I was probably tearing up, and I was up the back of the room, and this guy comes up to me and says, "Excuse me, sir, where are you from?" "From ABC Australia." He says, "I'm George Stephanopoulos. I'm with the candidate. Would you like to have some time with the candidate?" So I said, "Sure, we'll wait." And afterwards, Clinton comes along. He's like, I think he was a guy my size, big, does the double-handed handshake, stares you right in the eye, has a bit of a chat. Might have only been for 2 minutes. I even forget what he said, but he spoke about the importance of the election, as you can imagine, and how he loved Australians and the rest. It was over as quickly as that, and that was a very handy little insert in the story that gave us the added value that you always need in stories. Otherwise, you're just sounding like a repeat of the agencies.
In your career, what's the biggest regret?
I think we all have regrets. Sometimes it's been not tackling stories that I felt that I should have, that might have been more consumer related, wanting to help people, and so often my phone would ring with very sad cases where I just couldn't help. But I think that I made up for a lot of that also through the help of you and members of our team with the Commonwealth Bank money laundering story, where I think as a team we're able to get together, get that story out and fast. And I still remember the day, and this goes to the importance of having a good contact book and staying with some contacts even though they might have been useless for years. I'd had a contact who used to be within the old style Austrac that moved to another agency, who'd always given me bits of chicken feed every now and then that wasn't really that helpful. But one day I get this text, "Ring me now, Peter, urgent." And I pick up and it's, "Peter, go straight to the Federal Court Registry, look for Austrac v Commonwealth Bank of Australia, read the concise statement and come back to me." And I thought, wow, the Commonwealth Bank have 65,000 occasions breached anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing laws, and they inadvertently or otherwise have dealt with bikies who've been using a flaw in the software in their intelligent deposit machines to launder money. And by doing this and not having the right checks and balances, they've put the nation's security at risk and the bank's security at risk, and particularly on the counter-terror financing, because the more this story unwound, finding they're dealing with, not willingly, but dealing with bikie gangs, drug gangs, international cartels, you name it. And by going in hard on that story and picking up a Walkley for it, and in the coverage of a major event in 2017, we, in a small part, because there were other people who'd been working away on this as well, at the age, Adele Ferguson, a lot of other people, were able to really get it to the point where they needed to call a royal commission into the banking sector. And as we know, Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison tried everything not to have a royal commission, even shut down all the state ombudsmen to put in a national figure, but in the end the pressure was so great. And I feel proud that we were able to play a role in that, and also to bring some justice to people who had been blatantly ripped off by banking staff who are operating for themselves rather than the best interests of customers. So I felt very proud of that, and I felt that's the power of journalism. And you can have some sins, but they can be atoned by doing something significant that'll stand the test of time, but also at the same time maintaining good relationships with contacts, even the big banking bosses. During that period I've heard, just on private discussions, from Matt Common and Andrew Thorburn and those kind of guys. Most of those other banking bosses at the time have gone. They all know you're doing your job and all they want is a fair run. They don't need the a current affair gotcha treatment, which I've always tried to avoid. I've always preferred to try to let people dig their own holes, and it's amazing how often that happens. And I think that goes a lot to my ABC training, but going back to my tenacity, not taking no for an answer, and building strong contacts, even though some early on may have been not very useful. So getting to high level contacts, you try to get in touch with someone high up. If they at least return your call but don't want to do anything, you know that's at least a win.
Peter, so much of your journalistic career has been at the ABC, and you've described it as your spiritual home. What do you think is so special about the national broadcaster?
Well, mainly because I was brought up on the ABC. Our TV set seemed to be glued to Channel 2 all the time. I grew up listening to AM in the morning and PM while Mum cooked dinner. And even when I joined the ABC in radio news in 1984, I never thought I'd get the opportunity to work in radio current affairs, because at the time there were very firm divisions between radio news and radio, or the public affairs as they called it. And I never thought I'd have that opportunity. And it wasn't really until I'd moved to Melbourne, was lucky enough to take a year off and work for the BBC, came back to Melbourne and did a few things, got that job in Washington, came back, was the boss in Melbourne, which was a great role, but it was tough. And I had to do that job at a time when John Howard and Richard Alston had imposed major cost cutting on the ABC, and I was in the position of having to choose who was going to be made redundant or assess voluntary redundancies. And I realised that it's great when things are going well and you can be the big boss and come back after being a successful correspondent, everyone loves you, but when you've got to do the hard stuff, you don't have too many friends. So at the end of that part of my career, I left the ABC, which was very valuable for me, and I went corporate for a few years, but luckily for me, with a friend of mine, Michael Smith, who was the editor of The Age in Melbourne, to a company called IPR, which doesn't even exist anymore, but I was working with a group of mainly former journos, and we understood what it was all about, and we weren't working for some type of consultancy owned in Zurich. We were working for ourselves, and we largely enjoyed things. Then they closed and I worked for another consultancy which I didn't really enjoy. One day my phone rang and it was from the ABC, and I think it was Max Utrich, contemporary, later to be my boss, advising that the ABC wanted someone like me to come in, establish some business programs, and it was Business Breakfast, the program with Emma Alberici. The ABC had come in to some indirect money, which was additional to the ABC's budget, and they wanted a Monday to Friday breakfast program, which was hard to do because at the time there was no other ABC channel, there was no news, News 24, there was no ABC 2. So it was more of a preview program, which is harder than doing a review program. So we kept that going, and I was able to work with some great people, and I referred in one of my notes as working in a small team, because we were in a very small team, and because in some ways we were seen as a bit of a threat to the overall operation, we had to do everything on our own, from foreign to anything else we were writing, and crafting that program into a general program with a business flavour was difficult, because the original brief, it's all to be business. The brief it's all about how did the Dow Jones go, how did the Nasdaq go, what are these numbers? And I keep saying to people, I would hardly ever refer directly to these numbers. I'm more about the stories. So we focused on stories, and I think I hired some good people. Then when that got the axe, as seemed inevitable to me, I had this opportunity to go off and pretty much do whatever I wanted. I was made business editor, but I didn't really have any administrative or editorial control around me. So I just crafted this role into something so that I wanted to do, and I just went back to being a reporter. And I kept doing that until we got the other opportunity to resurrect the old business breakfast, where we created Late Line Business, which I'm very proud today, 20 years on. When did it start? 2006. Coming up to 20 years on, remains a glossy, well-produced, agenda-setting program. And while I very rarely contribute to the program, I just love the program in many ways because I'm not involved in it. I feel I've handed over enough skills, but I think it's there hopefully for the long term, and a lot of good people have been trained through it. People from the general newsroom have gone through it, and they've learnt that doing a business story is just like covering a sports yarn. Just get your facts and information ready, get the talent lined up, make sure they're the best, and get the best pictures. So once we got that up and running, I just thought I'll just keep going and I'll slot myself into AM. I thought I'm going to work for AM specifically from now on. So I've been working with the main focus on AM since 2006 with great executive producers like David Burgess, right through to now with Michael Edwards. And it's been a great experience, and I think I'm very fortunate in ABC terms that I've built up a high level of trust and credibility that I tend to get left alone because they know that I'll be able to walk in every morning probably with something cooking in the background, and if all of a sudden something happens overnight or they need it, I can get it together quickly, whether that's in a live Q&A or doing an interview. And on those really big stories like the Commonwealth Bank, to be able to use AM and also the World Today and PM, where we broke on radio anyway, that Commonwealth Bank story, use those high quality, high credibility programs as a platform to get those big yarns out. So I felt the ABC has given me a lot of levity, and I did go through a period where I was wondering, I thought I might have been a bit unloved, and I went and saw someone, and the answer was, we don't get in touch with you because we just want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I got the message. So I thought, just keep doing what you're doing, make the most of not having anyone interfere in your job, and try to pass a bit on.
On that, Peter, I mean, one thing that people outside the media and outside the ABC may not appreciate is the dozens and probably hundreds of people, myself included, who you've helped in their careers, mentored, guided. What advice would you give to anyone trying to get into the media, and more generally career and life advice for people just starting out?
I think in general, if I look back, probably early on it was all about me. I'd do whatever it took to get something done. Now I know it's not about me. I can work with other people, I can massage egos, I can help people out. When our Director of News, Justin Stevens, put a note out about my retirement, which was almost a shock to me that I was retiring. I'm still getting used to the idea. My phone just went off, hearing from people from way back where I'd done something probably insignificant, maybe just a bit of a kind word, or someone was having a bad day. I'd call them in and say, what's going on? How can we help? Do you need anything? A couple of more prominent moments where I think I've left a bit of a legacy, although my name wouldn't be attached with it except in memos buried deep in the ABC vaults. I had a couple of good reporters coming back from maternity leave in about 1997, and at that time the ABC had no job sharing program, so they were both returning from leave at the same time, destined to basically being polyfiller on the roster. I thought I'd just take them out, both out for a nice lunch and have a bit of a chat and welcome them back in. And one of them said, "Peter, have you ever thought about trying to get a job sharing program set up for returning women from maternity leave?" And I thought, that's a really great idea, because blokes don't have to go through this. They go straight back into, even me, when the ABC gave me years leave without pay, I went straight back into the old role as if I hadn't been anywhere. So I put the proposal up, thought about it a lot, got a bit of, advice from finances, and the biggest resistance came from, would you believe it, female bean counters, who said, this will never work, it might look good on paper, but it's going to be setting a terrible precedent, and the on-cost will go on forever and ever. Anyway, my big boss in Sydney at the time, Paul Williams, who was very supportive of me when he could, when I wasn't having my crazy ideas, said, if your budget looks like it can handle it, go for it. And it went through, and it's still there, and right afterwards other program outlets started using it, and I think that's been really helpful in getting women respectfully placed back into their role, rather than being on the 10 a.m. to 3 a.m. shift, whatever, somewhere, because it is easy for admin people or news editors or chiefs of staff to take the easy solution sometimes. So I feel very proud about that, just in terms of being kind to people. I think that's important. You can always do something to help people, and you can learn early on, and it's also not too late to learn. I remember early on when I had made some sort of smart aleck remark to a gruff police roundsman, Jack Darmody, who was your classic Daily Mirror police roundsman, and I'd made some sort of comment like saying, "Oh, it's so good to see you wearing a tie today," or something, and we were in the Evening Star Hotel, which was a good place to be, and he just monstered me in public, and I'd never copped anything like that before, and he'd been a mentor to me. And I spoke to my dad about it, who said, well, you deserved everything because you were being a smart ass. And he just said, just remember this, treat other people on the way up the way you want to be treated on the way down. And also, another thing I remembered was, never let the sun go down on an argument, because we all have our disputes. Sometimes things don't go the way you want, but you can't let arguments go on forever. You've got to bring some peace to it, which is why I feel grateful I'm having this opportunity now to see a lot of old friends and family, to be able to show how grateful I am for having them, and also the opportunities in life. Brought up in a strong family where we never had anything given to us, but we just had to work, and if we had our eye on something, we were encouraged. And that was, I come from a family of five kids, 3 boys, 2 girls. I don't know how my mother coped with 3 boys, but she somehow did, and I owe so much to them, because I feel that a lot of that is in my character, and the importance of, in your work, looking for any sort of, without being ideological, social justice in whatever you can do. Usually not achievable, because in journalism we very rarely have good outcomes in our stories. because that's not what we're about. We're about reporting and opening up the world to people who don't have time to be monitoring that all the time. So overwhelmingly, I feel the ABC has been my spiritual home. It's been the right place for me. Mum and Dad were thrilled to bits when I got the job at the ABC, even though they were pretty proud of me working for the Daily Mirror. I was a foot in the door guy, not a bad one either. But I'm glad and thankful for all the opportunities I've had, and also the investment the ABC put into me for a very long period and took bets on me for a long period, probably at times when they thought it might be a bad risk, but they stuck with me. And I'm lucky to be able to say I've had some very good bosses over the years who I stay in touch with now and look forward to going out to lunch with, which is one of my other passions as well. So we'll see about that.
The other end of our industry, aside from the people we work with, are the people who listen to us. Peter, now that you're officially retired from the ABC, is there any message you want to share with the audience who's been with you for so long?
Yeah, I think people like we who work in the business are often thinking, what's the next thing that's going to happen to make our lives more difficult in terms of changing digital technology? And I speak as someone, I feel as though I've ridden the crest of a wave with other people who've been as fortunate, starting out in tabloid newspapers, which were printed on hot metal, the way they were in Fleet Street, watching that transition onto cold print, seeing the demise of afternoon newspapers, but always realising that it's not the platform that counts. It can be anything. And for me, the changing platform was to move into broadcasting. That was the platform at the time in the mid-80s. Being able to work for the ABC or any of the cashed up commercials was a real bonus. And even now it shows that even though people are moving away gradually from free-to-air viewing, innovations that the ABC led the way on through Mark Scott, like iView, that's almost a default for a lot of people these days, rather than going to the telly and switching that on or listening to I listen to the radio off streaming or podcasts from my trusty iPhone. And I'm often saying to people who are saying radio, terrestrial radio is dying, I said, well, I don't think it's dying. I just think people's habits are changing. My 89-year-old mother was an early adopter. She's been listening to streaming radio and podcasts for probably the best 10 years. The late Mark Colvin got me right into it. Mark was an early adopter of everything, including podcasts and streaming. So my message is, don't worry about the platforms, because there's always going to be some sort of reorganisation. And as I mentioned in my note, there's always going to be another one. I've probably dodged the last one because I'm retired, as much as I don't believe it. They're going to keep coming, but it's the quality. It's keeping up the quality, chasing the stories, getting it right, who, what, where, when, why, bringing that additional context to it, and getting yourself to the point where you're ably qualified to provide analysis. And often, as you've done with me, Peter, can you give us 20 pars on the life of so-and-so? And I think, Peter, just start writing. And often that's the way you clean a few things up, and Michael does a bit of rewriting, which is usually necessary. That's when you know you've made it, when you don't need to look at your notes, you know what's going on, it's all in your head, you've got the background. And I think the ABC teaches you that, particularly for me, getting often called up onto News 24 or onto AM or other live programs, you've got to have it all in your head and ready to go. And if you don't know it, and if you can't sum up a complex issue in 3 bullet points, you maybe haven't succeeded. And I think that one of the best things that ever happens to me, occasionally, I was walking down the main drag of Redfern once, picking up some dry cleaning, and this guy comes over from the other side of the road on his motorbike and stops right in front of me, pulls up on the footpath and just said, "That's Peter Ryan." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Never go to Channel 9. Stay at the ABC. You don't go anywhere." I said, "I don't think I'm going to Channel 9, but I'll keep doing it." And he said, "You can take the most complex issue, and by the time you're finished and you break it down, I understand it, not fully, but just a bit more, and next time I learn more." So I think that's one of the biggest compliments you can get, bigger than getting an award, maybe not as big as getting a Walkley, but it counts a lot. And also knowing that you've got the love and respect of your colleagues and friends. So that's been really important to me.
Peter.
Yeah. I have been feeling the love a bit, which has been really, really helpful to me as well, because it's been difficult, and I'm now able to focus on spending more time with my wife Mary and daughter Charlotte, who need me and are looking after me, and I'm in the right place here. So I just wanted to say to everyone, including you and the team, everyone from Kim Williams at the ABC down, I'm very grateful for all the opportunities I've had, and most recently the support that I've been given, and encouragement to keep going if I felt I could do it. But I'm just at the point now where I know I'd be pushing things too far. Who knows, I might be getting ready for yet another comeback. So, you never know.
We hope so. And just one final question. Not many people might realise, but you're one of Australia's biggest Beatles fans,
Yeah.
Peter. What are your top 5 Beatles songs?
I've been thinking about this. It can change any day. People ask me this a lot. Is it almost not quite? Paul McCartney gets this question a lot, though. Obviously, he's in a different league to me, but Paul McCartney puts it down to his favourite down to Here, There and Everywhere off the Revolver album. I tend to agree. Revolver on any given day would be my favourite album, because it has just that right mix of that transition from the Beatles being the Fab Four into the psychedelic Four. I do love songs like In My Life, that beautiful McCartney song off Let It Be, Two of Us. We haven't quite worked out whether that's about him and Lennon. I think it is, or whether it's about him and Linda. But it's such a beautiful song. And whenever I hear those guys in harmony anywhere, it's hard not to get emotional. But I do remember the first time I ever heard the Beatles. It must have been in 1964, and I had some aunties who were more like big sisters, and I was sitting around in the backyard one summer, and I heard She Loves You, or I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I thought, that's just captured me. And in all the watching of the Beatles documentaries, and I thought, imagine coming off the back of, you're in post-World War II in the UK, rationing has just ended, JFK has just been shot, you've had the Cuban Missile Crisis, you turn on the radio and you hear something completely different like that, which I think did change people's lives, and more than just music, became part of people's lives and culture. So that's my love of the Beatles, and I was able to see Paul McCartney the last couple of times he was out here. He turned 83 the other day, I think. Quite amazing, really. And he's got a great backing band, which covers up some of the tunes or the levels he can't reach. But those guys, as individuals, were able to make such a difference in the world, and as a band, you could see all the trouble they had together, having been stuck basically doing the same thing together since 1957. But as soon as they got together, started playing, you could see they just lit up, and they were just like young boys, young blokes in a band. And I challenge anyone to go to the Beatles anthology and have a listen to And Your Bird Can Sing, Take Two, which is a great version because it appears they were on some sort of substance when they did the song, but it remains my favourite version of what is another great Beatles song, which of course on any given day, that could be my favourite, although Lennon always described it as a throwaway. So hopefully I haven't had too many throwaways in my life, but sorry to have gone on too long about the Beatles, but it's made a big difference in my life. So thank you for this, Michael.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.